so you can go back and see this all over again. So, okay, we are recording, and so welcome everybody.
Thank you.
Joe, your hands are in the air. Can you not do it? You cannot talk?
He can't unmute himself.
Oh, Joe. Well,
there we are.
Okay.
There we are. Thank you for unmuting me. I appreciate that.
If I click it enough times,
That's right.
something will work, yeah, or I'll break it permanently. Okay, so if there is an issue with muting or unmuting during the meeting or during the appropriate time, wave, I'll try to see you. I'll watch your hands. Use the chat function as well. Hi, Pete. Now let's see. I got you, Pete. Pete Gomina. Everybody, I'm drawing attention to Pete Gomina.
Yay.
There we go. And Ray Bittigan, just show me that you can unmute yourself. Okay, there we go.
So, Walt, I think in that little security badge, you can turn everybody's permission on right there.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. And
there's a little security badge, and that's where you do that.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, and I'm okay with that.
Oh, there we go.
Yep. And thank you for reminding me, though, Ray. You're the master of this process. All right. So now everybody can mute and unmute themselves without my assistance. And I'd like to again welcome all of you to the meeting tonight. We have two speakers that I have long awaited for. Two most august founders, most revered founders of Portland Photographers Forum, somewhere back in the dark ages, in the at least 20, 30 years ago, I believe. And as most of you know, these two guys, Brooks Jensen and Joe Lipka. And in tonight's format, what I'm going to do is change things up just a little bit. We're not going to see the monthly photo challenge reel first, because Joe is on the far right coast, and it's much later in the evening than it is out here.
It's very late.
It's very. And out of respect for that, we're going to start with their presentation here in just a few minutes. They will have a little time afterwards for Q&A, and I'm sure they're going to say a few words about the early days, but I'm greatly encouraged because the topic that I think we all want to hear from Brooks and Joe is this incredible work that they've done over the years to promote fine art photography. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody. Hi, Jeff Morefoot. So I'll say hi, Jeff. He's down in the southern hemisphere. But I would say that you'd be hard pressed to find someone in the northern hemisphere that has really done more to promote fine art photography than Brooks Jensen. And Joe and Brooks have quite a message for us today about that. So I'm super pleased about that. I also want to, on behalf of everybody in Portland Photographers Forum, Brooks, we want to offer our condolences for the loss of your dear wife.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know probably a lot of these people knew her and came to know both of you quite well over the years. So, so with all that being said, we're recording. We're going to go, Joe and Brooks may decide to check out after they're done. And then we'll have a couple of announcements that have come up that I'd like to share with you. And then we'll show the reel. And if you have to run up to your refrigerator to grab a long neck Budweiser or something, feel free to do that at your leisure. Or a Foster's if you're down in Australia, right, Jeff? Or it's way early. It's way early down there.
Lunchtime. It's lunchtime.
It's lunch. Okay, In Australia, you can have a beer.
Well, you know,
Beer o'clock.
as we say here, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning.
That's great. All right. So in terms of introduction, I just want to say one more thing that, and I actually had to write this down because both these guys, you saw their introductions in our newsletter, and but I just want to tell you for what it means to me, because Brooks was the guy that really introduced me to people like Chuck Kimmerly. We talked a little before this meeting about Chuck, but he, I always wondered what that little square magazine was in Borders bookstore on the shelf, and then I bought one, and inside those covers, I'd find people like Chuck, Dan Baumbach, Brigitte Carnacan, which just blew my mind. Joe Lipka was in there, and so many others that I just tried to start just off the top of my head who these people were that Brooks introduced me to and their work. So what a wonderful resource and inspirational for me. And then I found Joe, and Joe told me stories about Oregon and Eastern Washington and photography that I barely understood. I mean, you look at his work, and I hope all of you go to their websites and check it out, because it's just gorgeous work that you'll see. But things like I never saw Battery Russell at Fort Stevens as the Labyrinth, Joe, and what a wonderful revelation that was for me. So just seeing these stories and treating photography as the art that it can be, and I think we're in for a super treat tonight to hear from these guys. So you can't tell I'm very joyful. So I want to hand it over to Brooks and to Joe, and lead the way, gentlemen.
Okay, we will. First place, I have to say thank you. You have no idea how this warms my heart to see that all these years later, that PPF is still going. And if you understood the humble beginnings of PPF, which I'm going to try to share with Joe, you'll understand why it is that it brings such joy to my heart. This all got started back in the early 1980s, and I found that there was a poster up at Citizens Photo. Some of you probably remember Citizens Photo, advertising a workshop, and I was feeling incredibly isolated in my photographic work. I had a darkroom. I was working seriously at it. I was reading the Fred Picker newsletters. I was, very, very committed, very involved in photography, but totally isolated because I didn't know any other photographers. And I thought, well, maybe I could go to this workshop that's being advertised on this poster. So I called up the workshop instructor, who turned out as Stuart Harvey, which I guess you guys had here a while back as a presenter. I called up Stuart Harvey and I said, this is who I am, and I'm a young photographer and I'm just getting started and I'm feeling incredibly isolated, and do you think this would be a good thing for me to connect with other photographers and find some peers and people that I could talk shop with, and et cetera? And he said, absolutely, come to the workshop, it'll be great. So I signed up. A couple of days later, he called up and he said, hey, I've got another guy who signed up from Vancouver, Washington, who would like to have an opportunity to carpool with someone down to Coos Bay so that he doesn't have to drive down. Would you mind giving this guy a ride down there? And I said, no, that'd be great. That's part of the reason I wanted to sign up to the workshop, was to meet other photographers and talk shop. Well, the other guy was Joe Lipka. And so we drove down and got to know one another. And when we got down there, we met another photographer named David Best, And it turns out that David Best was my best man when I got married to Maureen 28 years ago, and Joe was there as part of the official entourage. All of these people that I found just because I decided to attend a workshop. And recently, Stuart Harvey sent me a snapshot of all of the workshop attendees in that workshop. And I don't know about you, Joe, but I had no idea that I still had that much hair back then. But it was quite the hoot.
Yeah.
After that workshop, the general camaraderie was so fantastic. There were Niels Wainelt was there and a bunch of other people who we just all clicked. And the idea came up that once we got back to Portland and the workshop was over, wouldn't it be nice to get together once a month or so and share work and keep the spirit of the workshop going? And so we started doing that. We started meeting once a month at one of the participants' houses, and we would get together. Stu Levy would come, Stu Harvey would come. We would bring work, we would share, we would do mutual critiques, and it was fantastic. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon we outgrew Michael's living room, and we had to find a place to meet. And then Stuart Harvey, who had to send out notices to everybody to say when the next meeting was going to be and what we were going to talk about and blah, blah, blah. Started finding that to be a burden. And so the newsletter went from an 8.5 by 11 folded thing to a 6 by 9 postcard to a 5 by 7 postcard to a 4 by 5 postcard. And we kept threatening Stuart that he was going to come up with a news stamp. And but that's how PPF essentially got started. Is at one point in time, Stuart said, you know, this is starting to have its own legs, and I would like to break it apart from the workshop. And so a bunch of us got together and formed the Portland Photographers Forum. And here you all are. And hi, it's great.
It's still there, still doing it.
We're still there. Yeah. It's
Way to go.
Yeah. Joe, shortly after that, moved to North Carolina, and that's where another story starts. So go ahead, and Joe, and tell about that.
Well, you know how it is sometimes when you visit somebody, when you're visiting with somebody's friend, they just say, well, down where I live, it's a y'all come back now, yeah? And that's what Brooks said. He said, y'all come back. And well, he didn't say it like that, but we'll come back and we'll photograph. And we take a week. We would take a week off. I would take a week's vacation, fly out from North Carolina to Portland, and we would go photographing for a week. And when we do this next month, this will be Photo Safari number 34 or 35. I forget.
No wonder you're looking so old.
Yeah, I know. It's like that. So we have our weekly or our annual photo trip, sometimes twice in a year, sometimes. We've gone, of course, all of Oregon, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, California. Northern California is kind of big. So we did like the Northern California coast. And then, of course, we did Yosemite. I mean, you got to do Yosemite, right? So we've done that in the Owens Valley and British Columbia, several places in British Columbia. And, of course, Inner Mongolia, that photographic hotspot of the world. So, and we did that in January, by the way. So it was not a hotspot at all.
Yeah.
So.
And we have all kinds of lessons that have come from that we kind of thought we'd share with you guys about what happens when you go photographing. And the first part of that I wanted to share is in the beginning years, we were sort of concerned about going photographing together because we thought, well, we don't want to end up with the same photographs. You know, if Joe photographs something and I photograph something, there's a risk that they'll look alike and we'll be duplicating each other and all that. And, you know, the first half a dozen or a dozen years, we discovered that we didn't do that. that his photographs looked like his photographs, my photograph looked like my photograph. So one year we said, tell you what, let's do this. Let's actually try to make each other's photographs. So Joe would set up his tripod somewhere and make a photograph, and then I would come and put my tripod right in exactly the place where his tripod was, and I would make a photograph. They still look different. So the bottom line is, it's a really great idea to go photographing, and don't worry about repeating each other or copying each other, because you can't. And if you are, then that says something else, but it doesn't say anything about location. It doesn't say anything about traveling together. It says something about maybe not making photographs that are your own photographs. I don't know. That's another whole lesson, but anyway.
I think that one of the things that was important about the PPF when we did that was the fact that you got to see so many other people's photographs on a routine basis. And I think that the feedback, getting feedback from your photographs, and more importantly, giving feedback to other people's photographs, to other photographers, was something that we learned. That's an art, and it takes practice, and it's a skill. And so if you don't do it, you'll never develop the skill. So that's why it was important for us to join this group and to work together with our fellow photographers, both giving and receiving critiques on work. So that was that. Besides the social and the party and stuff like that, was fun too. We had picnics. Did you guys have picnics? We had picnics, and we had cookouts, and it was fun. It was much smaller group, but we had fun like that. So.
And then the other part, I don't know if this ancient history is of any interest to you guys or not, but it sort of will help you understand where you came from, or where this group came from. When in the early days, we decided that we wanted to relieve Stuart of the burden of having to put out the the monthly newsletter. I made a fateful decision because I wanted to learn a brand new thing that had just started back in those days called desktop publishing. And I thought it might be useful in my business. So I volunteered to do the newsletter. And very quickly, I discovered, as any of you who have done newsletters like this have discovered, that you suddenly come face to face with the challenge of content. Because once you get past the part that says the next meeting will be Thursday at 7 o'clock, there's not much else to fill the page. So I started writing some little things for the early days of the PPF newsletter and give myself some practice with desktop publishing. And shortly after Maureen and I got married in 1992, one evening I was folding and stamping and putting the mailing labels on for all of the members in those days, which I think, Pete, you were probably a member way back then. I know Eric Brody was. I don't know if he's here tonight, but a number of you are still here. Anyway, I was mailing out the newsletters, and Maureen said, well, here's someone who lives in Minneapolis. Why are they a member of Portland Photographers Forum? I said, oh, they used to live in Portland and they moved away. And she said, well, why would they continue to subscribe to the newsletter and be a member? And I said, well, maybe they just enjoy the news of the group and friends, and maybe they're enjoying what they're reading in the articles that I'm writing. And she said, fatefully enough, she said, you don't suppose there's a business opportunity here, do you? And literally about 6 or 9 months later, the first issue of Lenswork came out. So Lenswork is a direct outgrowth of the Portland Photographers Forum newsletter. And again, that's another reason why I'm just thrilled that you guys are still here, still photographing, still working hard, and still making some great. Oh, there's John Lutz. Hi, John. John and I have known each other for ages and ages and ages too. So anyway, that's sort of the short history of PPF, and my roots in PPF and Joe's roots in PPF. And if you're at all interested in hearing some of those old PPF newsletters, I made a regular practice back in those days to audio record people who would come up and make a presentation. And we had some really powerhouse people. David Bales presented at PPF, and Ted Orland presented at PPF, and et cetera. And those audio tapes are available at Lenswork Online now. So you can go back and listen to old PPF meetings from the 80s and hear people back in the Jurassic Park era talk about the complexities of the zone system and all that kind of fun stuff. So, anyway.
One of the best meetings we ever did was when Christopher Burkett came up and did a presentation. That was, if you have to remember a meeting, that was one, because I was running them. I was in charge of programs at that time, and I got him to come up and show prints. And he came up with a stack like maybe yay big like that, maybe about 4 inches tall, of 16-inch square Cibachrome prints. And he would just kind of flip them up and people would look at them, and it was like dead silence for 45 minutes because people were just so blown away by that.
Yeah.
So you know, that was the big highlight meeting that I can still remember after these 30 plus years. Yeah. So of doing that. So
one of the things that Joe and I wanted to talk about a little bit was how our work evolved from what we were doing in the PPF days to what we're both doing now in terms of project-oriented photography. But maybe before we go on to that, it would be useful to take a short break in case anybody has any questions about PPF and the history of PPF. And if there's any curiosity, now's the time to ask the question. Nobody speaking up.
That's easy.
Far out. Okay, let's move on.
I'll ask a question, Brooks.
Sure.
So I think that one of the interesting pieces about PPF, and I was a president there for a little while, is that as the community transitioned away from the zone system, as you were just talking about, and into digital photography, it seemed that the technology was less to talk about after a certain point. And the meetings became became more difficult to find a common ground for everybody to talk about. And I think that's an interesting piece about the transition of PPF. In a sense, I feel like at the beginning, it was a lot of people trying to solve problems. And at a certain point, it became less about that. And it was a little bit nebulous what it was about after that.
You know, in the very earliest days, there was a lot of conversation about technique and how to achieve what you wanted to achieve. But the one thing I have to really compliment Stu Levy on is as much as he is a master technician in photography, he always understood that technique lives in service to an aesthetic idea. And so the question that always came up whenever Stu was involved in doing a print critique was, what is it you're trying to say? And then he would address how it is that you go about trying to accomplish that technologically. He had the technological answers, but where a lot of people were all fascinated about, what's your favorite f-stop and that kind of stuff, Stu was always focused on the aesthetic, on the artwork aspect. And that's always been a tremendous inspiration to me. And I think that's still an issue today. Matter of fact, Joe and I were just talking about this the other day because a number of the photo bloggers that you guys may actually watch on YouTube or read their blogs or whatever, several of them bailed out just in the last couple of weeks, saying that there wasn't anything to talk about anymore because there weren't so many new cameras coming out. And Joe and I just scratched our head and said, how can you possibly think that there's nothing to talk about in photography anymore because there's no new cameras? I mean, think about poor Eddie Weston. You know, Edward Weston used the same camera for all those years with those crummy lenses. He didn't care about cameras and lenses. He cared about images. And I think when you get right down to it, that's no different for us today on the cutting edge of digital technology than it was for those great photographers back then. So
it was one of the key phrases I filched from somebody's website was it says, cameras come, cameras go, photography is forever. And I think that isn't that great?
Yeah.
I think I'm happy to steal it. I think that's the essential image that you get to, or the essential problem of contemporary photography, maybe all photography, is that, you know, technical stuff now is nothing. I mean, it's automatic cameras, autofocus, auto exposure, auto everything. And now you got to worry about what you're going to take a photograph of and what it's going to mean. And that's a very difficult topic.
So that's my point exactly, is that in the earlier days, that topic was easy to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as we're sort of reduced to the point of actually talking about content and concept and aesthetics of photography, I feel like a lot of people have a difficult time talking about that, and they haven't had any practice. And one of the things I really worked at and had a hard time with was, how do you encourage people and teach people, and how do people learn to talk about what the feelings are behind the photographs they're making? And it's been a very interesting path for me to try to find a way to help people learn how to talk about that and to get it done effectively.
Yeah. Well, the most valuable tool, of course, is the cattle prod.
Yeah, very good. Followed by the fire hose.
Yeah. No, seriously, here's the one thing that I've picked up on more or less by accident, and that is it's very difficult to talk about a single picture. What can you say about a single picture? You can talk about geometry and composition and stuff like that, but that gets boring pretty fast.
But you can also talk about your intent.
An intent is a good one. But you know, if you put together a small group of 4 pictures or 5 pictures, or maybe as many as 10, it becomes a lot easier to talk about it. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's because I think, I'm not positive about this, but I think it's because the mind shifts from thinking about how to make a picture to what this group of pictures say. And instead of having a thumbs up or thumbs down, this picture is good, this picture is bad, this picture works, this picture doesn't, now all of a sudden you start thinking about what it is that they're trying to get across and whether or not that comes across. And so this really came home to me when we started doing the Seeing in Sixes project 5 years ago. And I had a lot of conversations with people who would call up and say, you know, I'm not quite sure I grasp this. Can you help? And that's what I discovered, is thinking in terms of multiple image projects really opens up the conversation. So as a group, you might try that. Try having a night where everybody who wants to participate doesn't bring their greatest hits or their latest winners, but try to have everybody bring 5 pictures that say something as a unit. It's amazing how it works.
You know, one thing I think about that is that becomes the new hurdle. And I find that, you know, when I'm talking to students, when I'm talking to people about their work, as soon as I say, oh, well, let's see a cohesive body of work, they're out. Yeah. And so I think, you know, it's really interesting as an educator to try to work towards, I'm with you on this. I think it'd be great if people could learn to talk about it. I've been working for a number of years at trying to figure out how to help people learn. And I'm curious if you've ever worked on those kind of topics.
Well, yeah, and actually this came up in PPF too, and David Bales had a really great idea in a very early PPF meeting, and I've used this for years, that when you do a critique session and someone puts up their work, instead of trying to make a comment about it by forming a paragraph to describe it or critique it or comment on it. Everybody in the room just says one word. And you don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to get called on. Just say one word. And the word that you say is what you get from that picture. And what that does a couple of interesting things is it gets people to think about how to respond with a word other than I like it or I don't like it or it's too dark or, you know, some technical comment. Because the word you want to say is an expressive word. What emotion does this give you? The other thing that happens when you do that is it's amazing how many different emotions come up from a group of people. If you've got, you know, 30 people at a PPF meeting and everybody's shouting out a word if they're motivated to do so, it's fascinating to hear the wide variety of things people get from a photograph, and that itself becomes a topic about why different people get different things. So that's a good exercise from David Bales. You might give that a try.
Walt, I think Laura wanted to say something.
Oh, hi, everyone. I was just going to say, too, in my professional practice as a teacher in higher education for the last decade and a half or so, the buildup of this can also be very helpful. Just start with comparative photographs and comparing and contrasting them. What do they offer? Are they exhibiting elements of time, or are they just adding new context? Are they playing off each other with juxtaposition? And then you can give them another step in the process. How is sequencing playing a role in the narrative or the storytelling element, or how are they playing off of each other to create new narratives? I think of like Ralph Gibson, for example, where entirely new narratives are created from unlike images even, as well as being able to tell a more narrative, almost journalistic kind of storytelling. But comparative photographs really give that stair step to all the different things about context that can be added by multiple photographs rather than just a single photograph overall.
Yeah.
But I was also really curious to get your feedback about PPF and bringing in, you know, kind of a new generation, because it's very difficult to connect in a lot of ways on this kind of more personal level, I think, for this younger generation of students who are, attention span is much shorter, much less. And how do we bring in the new generation even more, maybe to dynamics like this, where they really feel invested and more involved than just, like you said, Brooks, in the beginning, you felt isolated. I've been in Portland 7 years now. I still feel a little bit isolated, and I you know, I've been working at PSU the last couple of years and everything. So anything like that you have up your sleeve.
Well, getting youngsters involved is a challenge, because their perspective of photography is so different, I think, because of the iPhone. Gosh, I hope I'm not insulting anybody by saying that, but there's just a different mindset with taking snapshots with an iPhone than there is when you try to pick up a camera and do something that's personally expressive and artistic. And I think the observation I've made is this, that probably every one of you is involved in PPF because you feel like you're involved in some sort of stream that's working its way through history, that we've inherited stuff from Stieglitz to Weston to Adams to, you know, whichever school of thought, from Kappa to Ouija to whatever, that we're part of something that's bigger than us, and that we're each in our own small way making some small contribution to the pursuit of photography as an art medium. That's what I think is missing from the kids, because so many of them are not getting a photographic history education. one of the big moments in my life was now it must have been about 6 or 8 years ago. I was a reviewer at PPF, and sorry, a reviewer at Photolucida. Someone came in, sat down, showed me their work, and I've always used an idea that Harrison Branch gave us at a PPF meeting back in the late 80s. He would always try to identify what the photographer's fellow traveler was. Are you guys familiar with that term, the fellow traveler? He would identify someone in photographic history that he would want to turn that photographer onto and say, maybe you ought to go look at what they're doing because it might be useful for you to see that relative to what you're doing in your work now. The idea of fellow traveler was a constant theme. So anyway, this person came up, showed me their work at Photolucida, and I said, well, you know, this work really reminds me a lot of Edward Weston. And it's probably worth your time to really study what Edward Weston did. And this young MFA graduate said, who's Edward Weston? Had never heard of Edward. Got an MFA, and I said, well, did you study the history of photography when you were getting your MFA? No, that was an elective course. I wasn't required to take the history of photography. And so I passed on that one because I was more interested in doing alternative gum bichromate processing. And I cringed. And that's the difference between, I think, there's a generational difference. So somehow I think there's a key in there. Somehow you got to get the younger generation to understand that they're not inventing anything. They're carrying something forward that has roots before them. And to the extent you can do that, I think it makes photography even more important in their lives.
And in my history of photography class that I'm teaching currently and in past semesters, we actually have 2 podcasts by you, The Limited Palette and The Hyper World, which it usually conjures up a lot of fire and fury in some cases.
Oh, good.
So you are making an impact still. I just want to let you know. And I just want to say your voice is exactly the same.
Ah, yeah. The wonder of electronics.
You know, the dials up there. He's got his voice synthesizer in there.
Yes.
One of the things about the photographs from the younger generation is to look at where they end up. And so many of them end up in Snapchat and places where they just go away. So the sense of permanence really isn't there to the same degree it has been for most of us. Yeah, and that's a challenge. Now, Joe and I have started to do something that's
let's roll into this one.
A good chance to segue.
Yeah, good one, Patrick. Thanks.
Yeah, because Joe and I have roots that go back in the print world. Because again, if you think about when we started in photography, so many of us in this meeting started photography. If there wasn't a print, there wasn't a photograph. The only exception to that might be slides, I suppose. But we had to make prints. But the problem with prints that I discovered in my world is that they tend to accumulate. I mean, I can make prints way faster than I can sell them. I can make prints faster than I can give them away. And so I started hearing stories when Lenswork, in the early days of Lenswork, I started hearing stories from families who would call up and say, dear old dad or dear old mom have passed away and they've left a closet full of fine art photography and I need to do something with it. Where do you think I should take this? And that's one of the problems that all of us face is what are we going to do with our archives? But I'm going to set that aside for just a minute. But really, when you get down to it, the print is a bit of an anomaly relative to distribution. It's a marvelous artifact. I still make them. I love them. I've got tons of them up here. But but the problem is, if that's the only thing you do, you're going to find yourself here in 2020 with a relatively small audience, because even if you have an exhibition, it's only going to go up for 30 or 60 days, and it's only going to affect a very small geography. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the only answer. For a lot of people, the other answer is social media. And Joe and I have spent hours and hours talking about social media, and we've both come to the same conclusion, the one you just mentioned, Pat, which is it doesn't go anywhere. You put an image up, it lasts for whatever. You get a bunch of thumbs up and thumbs down, and who cares? And it doesn't lead anywhere, which led us to pursue the idea of a hybrid between book publishing and social media, and that middle ground for both of us is the PDF. And so Joe and I, 10, 15 years ago, practically started producing PDFs seriously. And now I do a regular PDF of my work pretty much every other month. Joe does them every month.
Yeah.
And we find it much easier to get a bigger audience, but we still have the staying power of the book. They stay around for a while. And I have no doubt in my mind that if Ansel Adams were alive today, he'd be publishing PDFs like crazy. So if you've not done it, I really encourage you to explore it, because it's a fascinating idea. Don't give up prints, still make prints, but this gives you another vehicle. And Joe's done way more than I have. How many PDFs do you have on your website now, Joe?
Somewhere between 90 and 100.
Yeah. Each one an individual project, each one like a little book. Joe and I, we both offer our PDFs for free. We sell our prints, we sell our chapbooks and folios and those kinds of things. But we get so much reward from distributing the free PDFs that it has really energized both of our productivity in the last 10 years in particular.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that comes, I've never, ever had any success at all selling prints. It's a money. I tell people that, you know, for a gallery exhibition, I might be able to afford one every other year or so, because, you know, it's just it's a big drain on the pocketbook. And, you know, for the month that it's hanging up, I mean, you know, you're done, and then when you come back home, they're gone. The last exhibit I did was in 2018, and at the completion, I designed as a completely disposable exhibition. And literally, when the exhibition came down, it went into a garbage bag into the dumpster. I mean, it was there were no frames. No frames were wasted. No glass was broken. But you know, it just disappeared. And so if I needed to ever have that exhibit again, I would have to reprint it. So
you should have told me, Joe. I would have given you $10 for it.
It would have cost that. It would cost probably 5 times that to ship it to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're
So,
probably right.
Brooks and Joe, it's like you were talking about how social media is so impermanent. And then I was just thinking about like what the current trends are on social media. And I think that I kind of am exploring that idea of, you know, like, yes, you can make a drop in the pond by throwing your images out into that pond, and it has a ripple effect, and it does affect people, even though it only lasts for whatever social media outlet you tend to use.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is influence in that, and it's a different influence than, like, with my grandkids. Like, we don't ever talk on the phone. It's got to be text. It's got to be text, and we have to communicate with. You were talking about communicating with the younger people. We need to communicate with the younger people, and if they don't want to see periods at the end of their texts, we need to learn not to put periods at the end of the text if we need to learn that language. It's like learning French or Hebrew or something.
Becoming an influencer.
Well,
I don't know
but
about influencer. It's you know, just putting your heart out into the world. And I think putting your heart out into the world is not only cleansing for yourself, I think satisfying for yourself as an artist, whether you're a photographer or a painter or you know, like whatever you are. It's like you're putting like good vibrations out into the world. And that what's a photograph? You look at a photograph. You look at a, you know, like sunrise over, you know, like
Look at behind you.
yeah, it gives you something.
No.
And it's just a different media of communication. So it depends on who you're communicating with.
Yeah, adaptation is the event right now, because as fast as this stuff goes, as fast as it goes, as fast as the technology goes, you're continuing on, as our friend Huntington Withering calls the hamster wheel of progress. You keep running around in a circle because your technology goes. And what we're espousing is that, yeah, technology is great. We live with it, we embrace it, but basically the content is still the really important thing that we're more concerned with than anything else.
well, and I think there's probably some of you in the group who are still working in the wet dark room, and you know that working in the wet dark room, you spend unbelievable amounts of time and energy to get a perfect print. There's a pursuit of perfection that is part of the art making process. That's what I see is missing from social media. The photographs in social media are click, and if it's lucky and you got the right thing, then fine, you get a bunch of thumbs up. If it's not, you apply a fancy filter to it, which makes it look cuter, and maybe you get thumbs up. But there isn't the same kind of pursuit of excellence that there is in dedicated art making. And I guess maybe I'm just a dinosaur, but I'm still interested in that pursuit of excellence in art making, which is another reason why I like the PDF versus, for example, the web page. With a web page, you don't have control the same way you do with a PDF of things like typography and layout and design and all those things. You can really put some energy and some effort into a publication, be it a blurb book or a PDF or whatever, that really says, this is my best. And I don't see that happening in social media very much.
Brooks,
Maybe I'm just missing it.
I think part of that is, if you know it's only going to last for 15 minutes, why are you going to put that much effort into it?
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point.
Yeah, Brooks, one of the things for some of us that came out of the dark room and have gone completely digital, I think, like Eric Brody and some of those guys, we do put a lot of effort into to the digital image that's going to go on to Facebook or whatever. We do make prints also, but I think that since we came out of the dark room, we might put more effort into it. But the younger generations that they don't even know what a dark room is. They just use their phone. I've never seen a dark room. They probably do the point, shoot, click, post it.
I just had a great idea. I could charge people for tours of my darkroom. That would be good. I mean, it's not a darkroom anymore, but you can charge tours. You can make some money for it. I mean, because we're not making any money selling photographs. Maybe darkroom tours would be a good thing.
But see, I know something the rest of these people don't, Joe, and that's that you've converted your darkroom into your brewery, and that's where you do your homemade beer.
Well, yeah, but that's
well, that would be a good tour too.
Yeah.
Yeah, where can we sign up for that brewery tour?
Yeah, I like what Steve said, because for those of us that started in the wet darkroom and have gone digital, it's just so much easier. I mean, it just makes so much more sense, and it's the stuff that we struggle to do is now like that. So I think it's much better. I really kind of feel sorry for the people that are just growing up with digital, because they don't know what struggles they have had to overcome. So yay, Steve.
I do think you kind of have to balance who we're talking about though here. If we're just talking about the general media, social media, and just people that are taking selfies and this versus real photographers who are utilizing social media to their advantage to help market themselves, that's a vastly different thing than just everybody snapping pictures. I think we should probably limit it to this idea of photographers versus the everyone else that has a cell phone and thinks they
No
can
question.
snap
Yeah.
photos.
Yeah, there's
I
no
agree.
That a little bit for us at least.
I agree with Laura. This is Pat Rose, by the way. And Giannis, thank you so much for saying what you did, because I think a lot of photographers who are fairly new to the business, so to speak, are, figuring things out.
Yeah.
And not every photographer who feels that they have something to say or even to, communicate sheer beauty without even an underlying message that they can articulate. These, a lot of us out here are showing our work. We have no recourse actually, but social media. And a lot of it's a little discouraging too, to feel that your work is being viewed by a certain segment of the photographic community in one way, whereas just the novice photographer or the lay person who knows nothing about photography but maybe have an appreciation for art has a different kind of take on the whole thing. So social media may be our only recourse, at least to get the encouragement to carry on and try to improve our craft. Now, whether we're doing that on the basis of the number of likes that we get or from other outlets, joining photographers groups and talking with people, I think is a very individual thing. But I wouldn't discount social media as a way to spread, your voice. And I guess the bottom line for me is I feel a little like there's, a little bit of, I'm going to fumble through this because I haven't really thought this out that much, but of superiority in, certain directions where this kind of photography is considered good. And, if it's, somebody said it very nicely, if it's merely sublime without a message underlying it, then it's considered, not up to par. It has to have a certain, thing that I think is coming out of the art schools. There's a certain sensibility that people are striving for that, someone like me who doesn't have a background in the fine arts, quite frankly, just doesn't get. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble here, but I don't know if what I said makes any sense. But, for people who have no recourse because they're not going to, make lens culture, that avenue, we've got just the local galleries to turn to, and we've got social media. So,
but you do have something else, Pat, and that is that you have this group. Because
yes.
I'll guarantee you that when you guys get together and look at prints, you don't look at each other with the thumbs up and thumbs down.
No.
There's much more of a caring and giving and sharing, and so that's what's often missing from social media is that it seems to me that it's pretty superficial. I would much rather send a beginning photographer to a workshop, to a group like PPF, to their local camera club, where they can interact with people instead of icons on the screen. Because I think every single one of us has to start somewhere, and you start by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. But the more you can surround yourself with people who care and who will share, and at least my experience in PPF in particular, was no one had any secrets. Everybody was willing to share everything. And that's how we improved, because the one thing everybody has who's involved in a group like this is the desire to improve themselves. If you weren't interested in improving your photography, you wouldn't be a part of the group. And
That's
so just being in the group is a huge step forward, or attending a workshop or something like that, so that you can get the help from other people. And that's how the group survives. And that's why I think you guys are probably still here after all these years, is because there's been such a wonderful spirit of camaraderie and helpfulness.
Yeah,
It's
I
all,
agree with them.
it's almost 40 years. So you know that you've got something, if any volunteer hobby-based organization can hang together for almost 4 decades, you're doing it right. And that comes back down to the people and how the people interact. So yay for all of you.
Yeah.
And I think you can see in education the backlash coming here.
Yeah.
Some of the most promising students I have are BFA like photography students who are just coming in, and they're really young, and this social media is all they've known, and they're really excited to see that there's something else and there's a tradition behind it, and they actually are like craving this idea of the authentic and an experience and something that's real and that doesn't just live in a digital cloud. And that's, my God, some days it's like the thing that keeps me going at the end of the day. So I got to keep, pulling those students, in and trying to help them get involved in groups like this. So I really want to thank you guys for.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff Curto, can I put you on the spot? Good to see you, by the way. Haven't talked to you for a while. How did you get your students excited? You taught for years.
I did. I still do, actually. Hi, Brooks. Nice to see you. And, it's interesting to see this group of people, none of whom I know physically other than Brooks. And, thanks for Walt Duddington inviting me tonight to sit in on this session. While you guys have been talking about social media, I've been looking for you all on social media. And it's interesting because, you're absolutely right that younger people are looking at social media far more than, looking out here. I see that I'm not the only gray-haired person in
At least
the group.
you got hair.
I do. I'm so happy.
Jealous,
I have,
jealous.
but for me, things like Instagram is a place where I don't think of, I think of my website as not necessarily static. It's changing, sometimes, but Instagram is changing for me all the time, my feed, but everyone else who I follow on Instagram is changing all the time. And I'm really interested in seeing, I don't have a PPF, right? I don't have a group like you all where I live or where I am. So I don't have that sounding board to feed back with, for work. So I'm really intrigued by things like, what are the photographers that I'm interested in following and looking at and gaining new insight and ideas about the panoply of what photography can do. For me, that's Instagram, occasionally Facebook, but Instagram is this constant, churn of imagery, much of which is like, dumb, but on the other hand, I've found an awful lot of really interesting photographers with whom I now have dialogue and so forth and so on through that. So to answer Brooks' question, how do you get students engaged in photography? One of the things that I do is they've all got Instagram feeds. And one of the things that I do is I sit down with them and
Oops.
Ruh-roh.
And freeze.
Maybe there was a period at the end of that sentence. He sits down with a period.
He just froze.
I agree with what is being said here. Going back to what Laura pointed out earlier, you have to make the distinction between the audiences that you're presenting your work to. There's the, you know, the lens work, lens culture audience, and then there's the, you know, on the other extreme, the Facebook audience. But in between, as Jeff pointed out, there's Instagram, which I think among the social media, and perhaps Flickr too, that is, you know, a cut above, and it's a way to get your work out there. The whole lot of photographers out there showing their work on Instagram and getting feedback. So that's another learning venue. If you can't, as Jeff said, have a PPF at your disposal.
And I think my internet connection pooped out there for a second.
Yes,
but
it did.
but I just wanted to continue really quickly, and I'll yield the floor here in a second. But one of the things that I do with the students is I sit them down and I say, you know, show me your Instagram feed, because they've all got them. And, you know, what does your Instagram feed say? And what is it saying about you? And how do you, you know, and many of them are aiming at BFAs or MFAs. And, you know, what does the picture of you partying tell the rest of the world about you as an artist? And one of the things that almost all of them do after that is start a second Instagram feed that's not about them partying. And
Great idea.
they begin to think about what it is that a curated view of who they are can possibly be out there in the world. So, you know, I've looked at a bunch of your websites in the last hour or so, and I'm really, you know, I would encourage you, if you are on social media in some way, put that link there on your website so that people can follow that work, you know, that you're putting out there, whether it's, you know, Instagram or Facebook or Flickr or whatever, because it's likely that that content is rotating more frequently. And I'm interested in seeing, I want to know what it is you're doing now. You know, what did you see today or yesterday or this week? You know, what's the project you're working on right now? And I do love the PDF idea, but from a pragmatic point of view, the social media world is like, you know, boom, it's there. And, you know, you can put 10 pictures up there and people can feed back to them. And, you know, so I'm not downplaying the PDFs and the blurb books and all those things, which anybody who does know me or my content that I put out there, I'm big fans of those things, or I'm a big fan of those things. But
I think they have different purposes, though, don't they? The Instagram and the social media I think of it more like a sketchbook. It's where you go to get ideas. It's where you go to experiment. It's where you go to share some stuff. A PDF and a blurb book or a commercial publication is more where you're saying, okay, this thing I'm done with. This is a completed thing, and they're sort of apples and oranges.
I think really basically we've really gone way out in left field here, because basically what we're getting down to is basic distribution of a product. And that really sounds horrible, but, you know, because we're talking art here, aren't we? So what it does is it says that I have as an artist, you're in charge of your own little business that has the product is your artistic smarts and your artistic product, which is, again, terrible, but, you know, that's what it is. And how do you get it to the people out there? Well, I've got my Instagram feed. I've got my website. I have a blog. I have a Facebook page. I've got all sorts of different things I can do. And it's all about packaging up the artwork of Joe Lipka and presenting it to the greatest number of people possible. So that's where we're headed with this right now. So, you know, I have blogs and I have a website. I don't do the Facebook. I don't do Instagram, Mug, Flickr, whatever the latest TikTok, whatever all the latest stuff is, I don't do. Because I'm just an old guy, okay? And I don't want to get so totally lost in that technology that I forget that I'm doing art and doing photography and art together. So, you know, I kind of self-restrict myself. Now, does that cut down the number of people that see my work? Yeah, but don't know if those are the people that would really gain anything from my work. So it's how you put the whole thing together, basically.
Hey, Jeff, are you still doing your workshops in Italy?
I'm laughing because I'm supposed to be there right now.
Oh,
I'm supposed to be in Italy right now teaching photo workshops,
that's sad.
but they don't want us there.
Yeah, I tried to do the same thing earlier this year. Our trip to Italy got canceled also.
We're not allowed to go to Italy. So yeah, I'm actually, where should I be? I should be in Rome right now, on our way to Umbria to this next group. So, but yeah, I'm still doing them, but we've had to postpone to 2021. So,
well, the part of the reason I ask is because, you know, when I see it, I see a PPF is one way to connect with a group and to get feedback. Going to a workshop is another way to connect with a group and get feedback. Instagram is a way to connect with a group and get feedback, and they're all different, and the kind of feedback you get is all different. And I'm not sure I see one as better than the other. And thank God we have all these options, because when Joe and I were starting off, you know, there wasn't a PPF. We kind of had to make a PPF because it didn't exist. And workshops were a primitive thing back then. You know, we live in a fantastic time because all these resources are available.
Oh, I'll disagree with you there slightly, because I think the workshops that were 30 years ago were much better, because you would wind up with, you know, 12 people in a big house at the beach over the weekend, looking at lots of photographs, meeting lots of people, talking lots of people with lots of people, and doing photography. And now basically I've seen workshops which are, you know, 300 people in the Holiday Inn ballroom, you know, sitting next to each other, watching some guy do a PowerPoint presentation. You know, so
the concept of what workshop is has really changed. And a lot of that has had to do with the digital photography revolution, and a lot of professional photographers who all of a sudden were trying to scramble for ways to make income.
Exactly it.
So, you know, there are still workshops of the sort that you're describing, with small groups of people and intensive looking at photographs and discussing photographic ideas. And you know, I like to think that that's what I do in my workshops, but you know, it is a slippery slope in some ways in the world of what workshop means anymore.
Joe, I think, Joe, that they're still out there. I mean, I've taken lovely workshops from my friend Ray Bittigan, who I think harkens back to that time that you're talking about. And I've taken nice classes. Laura, you don't remember me, but I took your Photoshop class many years ago at New Space. So, you know, you can still learn in the classroom settings.
I remember you. Sorry.
There's something else that's going on that I don't think we've acknowledged. And the fact is that when PPF began, there were some gorgeous, gorgeous landscape photographers. And many of you spoke the same visual language with some variation, but still in all, you had a common ground. And I feel as if the vocabulary that's being spoken now is vastly dissimilar one from the other. And I think that learning about someone else's vocabulary is essential to us, especially those of us who are older, who want to remain in the cultural conversation. And I'm one of those people, so that I maintain an Instagram discipline. Actually, it's an honest to God discipline where first of all, I usually don't ever put anything on Instagram that I have not printed. And I print once a week for a number of hours. And don't talk to me on that day. Don't expect, so I don't answer the phone. That's my day to print. But on Instagram, I developed this way of speaking to the other. And I also engage, there are people on Instagram who I admire very much. Brooks, you and I talked about a guy from Mexico who you couldn't interview because he said he didn't speak English well enough, whose name Levy, Moise Levy. Well, I had discovered him on Instagram many years ago, and then you published his work. Had I not had the experience of Instagram, I would not have had the exposure to that vocabulary. And I think that exposure is valuable beyond comprehension. I've been in PPF not as long as Pete Gomina, but I've been in PPF longer than most of the people among the 50 of us on this call. And on the board intermittently for 8 years. I'm just leaving the board now. But I think that there's a sort of a commonality of old guys. And not only, so they're my friends, but they're not necessarily my aesthetic peers because we're not speaking the same language. And I think we have to acknowledge language differences.
Yeah, Carol, and this is one of the very specific reasons I've written about this, about why I struggle sometimes with the thumbs up and thumbs down aspect of social media, because really what the thumbs up and thumbs down is all about is this picture looks like I think it should look. Well, that's the viewer putting a value judgment on the language that the photographer is using, when really I think a much healthier approach is, as a viewer, to be open-minded and to assume that the photographer is saying something that's of value and that is worthwhile, and to open ourselves up to their language, not to close ourselves down to their language. And that's why I really dislike the thumbs up and thumbs down.
I can respect that. I go on, I'm not content with thumbs up and thumbs down. I'm interested in something I call the cultural conversation.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges that we have at Lenswork, quite honestly, is because the vast majority of stuff that comes in, you know, maybe is not at all what I would be interested in doing as a photographer. So I have to make sure that that's not a part of my thinking at all, is when I look at a submission to say, well, that's not what I would do, because then I wouldn't publish some really great stuff. So that's the whole idea about the world of art, is that you have to assume that everybody who's participating as a producer, as an artist, is putting their very best effort into it in the hopes of making something that people are going to be interested in seeing, and that somehow expresses themselves with a certain amount of integrity and honesty, and that as viewers, we open ourselves up to that and take a look at it. And when photography is used that way, I think it rises to the level of art. When people use, well, I just did a podcast that hasn't broadcast yet, so you haven't heard it. When they flip their camera over to do cute dessert, and they take pictures of what they're about to eat and share that, I'm not sure I would call that art. It might be fun to see what my friends are having for, you know, a dessert, but it's not art to me.
It's valid social media, but I think that the social media rub comes from a poster standpoint. And what I think about that is that anybody who posts a picture on Instagram or social media, let's just be general, who pretends they don't care about how many people like it is lying, I think. So what can happen, I think what can happen is that you can post a picture that you may feel ho-hum about, but suddenly for one reason or another, it gets a big response, and then you changes your own opinion about your own work. And similar, you could post a photograph you feel very strongly about for good reason, and for no good reason, it could get no attention, and suddenly your opinion has been swayed in another way. And so I feel like what it's done is it's made it so that we're not able to make judgments about our own work, but we rely on this vast unknown mass to tell us what we think. And I think that there's something a little bit hard about that. I have friends who post on social media and nobody responds, but I think their work is wonderful. And I have other friends who post on social media and they get vast response, and I'm not entirely convinced they're deserving. So I think there's a funny effect on the poster as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out too that a lot of social media, like Instagram and Facebook, I guess they're jointly owned, rely on an underlying mathematical algorithm. So you're not getting the thumbs up or thumbs down for, any sort of pure reason that people are really responding to your work, but oftentimes what gets shown. And you're at the mercy of the algorithm of the month. These things change constantly as to whether you get the likes or you get no feedback at all. So I think that's a danger right there, that you get, like you said, Ray, you get this unfounded notion that your work is bad because you're not getting the traffic, and equally unfounded notion that your work might be good because you are getting a lot of traffic. So I think that's an important point about social media.
The false negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, the algorithms put us all in a positive feedback loop. And so when we like stuff, it will feed us more stuff just like the stuff we like, which will feed us more stuff just like the stuff we liked.
How about your Netflix? Anybody do that? Netflix? Yeah, it's just, boy, you watch one documentary and that's all you'll ever see for the next 6 months.
Yep.
Computers have our number.
I'm going to ask how are our standards, our personal standards, developed as we're growing as photographers? How are they formulated, though, other than feedback? I mean, just think of how Impressionism was initially received, or lots of other schools of painting. It sort of begs the question of feedback from the environment through whatever channels you're talking about.
I think that one of the things you're talking about is if you want to, is to trust the feedback for what you're doing if what you're doing is different. Now, if what you're doing is different, you're going to have to brace yourself for either, to me, I think being ignored is the worst thing. Being criticized is actually pretty good because people have taken an interest in it and they come up for reasons why they don't like what you're doing, and that's really valuable. And then there's, the happiness and joy, which is if everybody likes what you've done. But this whole PDF thing that Brooks and I have been working on for a couple of decades, we think it's starting to take off because we've seen a lot of traction with people viewing the work that we're doing. So if you're going to do something different, it takes a long time. Yeah. It's a lonely road, but
Absolutely, that's what most notable artists have always endured.
Well, let me share a story from one of my early workshop experiences. I think I've written about this in Lenswork, so some of you may have heard this story. Forgive me if it's a repetition, but in a workshop that I went to that was taught by Bruce Barnbaum, Ray McSavany, and John Sexton in Yosemite. It was really a cool event, and I was very nervous. I'd never had my work critiqued before. And we divided the group into three. A third of them went with Barnbaum, a third of them went with Sexton, and a third of them went with McSaveny. And I was in the Barnbaum first group. And I was so nervous, I waited until everybody else had shown their work, and I decided I wasn't going to show mine, and Bruce would have nothing to do with it. And he said, Brooks, get your stuff up here. So I brought it up there, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked, and he turned to me and he said, are you sure you want to be a photographer? I was devastated, you know, and if I hadn't carpooled with someone down there, I probably would have gotten the car and driven home, but I had to stay. The next critique session I had was with John Sexton. Put up the same work in the same sequence. John looked at it and he said, you know, all this work on this side over here, he said, this is pretty good. He said, I don't think I'd change anything. I'd be happy if these were my photographs. This side over here we can talk about. There's some things I want to suggest. I went, that's interesting. Different opinion. A couple of days later, I had Ray McSaveny. Put the same work up in the same sequence. And Ray said, this work over here, I'd love to trade you for some of these because I think they're great. But this work over here, this is not so good. And I went, I get it. Anytime you get feedback from wherever, what you're getting is someone's opinion. And the idea is to get lots of those. And some of them you take with a grain of salt, but in every case, it builds your character, it builds your confidence. When you start seeing some consistent things said, maybe you pay more attention to them because of that. But I don't think that necessarily comes through in social media. But anyway, that's another story. But the point is, a group like you guys have, sharing your work with each other is, I think, a marvelous thing to do. But you have to realize that you're a group of individuals and you've all got different opinions. And that's exactly perfect. It's exactly the way it should be.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Brooks, is so important to bear in mind that we present our work to whatever audience out there, and what we get in feedback is going to be a very subjective opinion from the source. Mm-hmm. So I think Alan alluded to this, that the most important thing we can do as photographers, it's obvious, is to maintain the integrity of our own, I don't know how to express it, to maintain integrity of the work. That if we put work out there, we know in our hearts that it is quality work. It may not be, received equally well among whoever's looking at it, but we know this is what we have to offer the world, and we do it to the best of our ability.
And this is where ego comes into play too, because the other side of that coin, of course, is it's really possible to become incredibly defensive about our work, mm-hmm. and overestimate it and think it's better than it is. And that's where a group of friends who care about you and share your passion can be really useful. Because I doubt any one of you in this group would tear someone else's photography down for ego purposes. I mean, so you develop a trust, and that if I bring my work and someone says, gee, this is what I see that I might do differently, I can trust that that's not them being mean. It's them trying to give me something that I can use.
One of the things that I've learned from social media and going to PPF and various meetings is PPF, we look at it from a photographer's point of view. I'm lucky enough where I actually sell photographs, very large photographs, and those don't necessarily I use Facebook and other feedback mechanisms to get response from those people, because they want, a designer wants purple to match the decor. Mm-hmm. Somebody wants a 7-foot photograph because they had a glass of wine in this place. You know, so it's like I love social media for that kind of feedback.
Absolutely.
And it's totally different than you go to PPF, you put your print out there. Yeah, you know, like the composition, you know, it's a little bit askewed, you know, it could be this, could be that, which is valuable. But I think that, you know, it depends on what you want to do with your photographs. I don't know if I've ever sold one of my photographs to another photographer. You know, it's always been a trade.
That's one of the real problems in photography these days, is that it's become so clubbish. I mean, my favorite bookstore is Powell's Books, right? Have you ever noticed how the photography section is in one part of the store and the art section is associated but not intermixed?
Right.
You know, that's the problem, that photography has become so inbred in some regards that we don't talk outside of our own circles, which is really unfortunate. Which is why Ansel Adams is the one photographer who passes what I call the airport test. If you go to the airport and ask 100 random people to name me some famous authors, they'll give you a list. Name me some famous musicians, they'll give you a list. Name me a famous photographer, they'll give you one. Ansel Adams. That's
Brooks,
it. Because he appealed outside.
But Brooks, why did he make such a famous name? Why?
Well, I've said for years.
PR.
Yeah, I've said for years that that the environmental movement made two people famous, and that was John Denver and Ansel Adams. They happened to be the right guys at the right place at the right time with the right artwork, and they rode the coattails of environmentalism. And
it was also the publicity face for Yosemite.
Well, yeah.
I mean, he actually worked in-house.
Public relations person.
He had dollar bill turnage, you know, as his businessman.
I'll jump in and say that Ansel Adams knew about social media before there was social media. He worked his ass off at being famous for being a photographer.
Yeah,
he really did. And there's no sort of magic in it. He worked hard at being famous at being a photographer.
Who's the most famous living photographer today?
Oh, that's a great question.
I would propose that it's Annie Leibovitz.
Yes.
And the reason it's Annie Leibovitz is because who did she photograph?
Celebrity.
Famous people. So that's a whole different thing about how to work PR, which doesn't have anything to do with art. But anyway.
It depends on what you want to do with your art. You know, if you want it to hang out, you know, in your closet or in your drawers, you know, like then it's fine. But if you want to, you know, have your art out in the world, you've got to consider that.
That's what I said way back in the very beginning. If you're depending on income from your art, you spend more time merchandising, marketing, selling, hustling, marketing, whatever you got to do. It's all promotion, 90% promotion, you know, 10% art. You know, that's what you need if you're going to make money at it. That's what you got to do. Treat it like a business.
Yeah. And besides, if we all want to make money, we should give up photography and become poets, because poetry is where the real money is.
I know about it. Absolutely not.
I would argue that some celebrity photographers were able to transcend beyond that and make art. And just think Irving Penn and Richard Avedon.
Yeah.
You know, that
or even Arnold Newman. I'd put him in that category.
Absolutely. They were able to take the commercial work they did and make such powerful work that it transcended into the collectible art market in a really profound way.
Do you know who the #1 selling photographer is relative to photography books today?
Photography books?
Tom Ang?
Ann Geddes.
Oh.
Now there's an artist. See? All those baby pictures with angel wings and stuff.
Yeah.
And I would say Gregory Crewdson. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter Lick.
Hey,
Well, anyway,
how are we doing for time here?
We're having a good time.
yeah, we're having a good.
Well, while you all have been having a really good time, I have been having microphone issues.
We can tell.
And so I've been in and out. My soundboard must be going. And I've got an external mic, but the soundboard's inside the computer. And I got 2 computers set up because I wanted to have a backup.
We can see you on 2 computers.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, I'm over here too. I'm just looking at the clock. I have no reason to stop this wonderful discussion. I just kind of checking my microphone, my external mic is working first, and that we do need to bring it down at some point.
Tuesday's okay.
We're getting close.
Hi,
Well,
John.
for me, you're getting close, but I'm okay with that. But if you wanted to slow down, I wanted to do just one little thing here, Mr. Jensen.
Please.
I would like to do that. I would like to talk. One of the things that, and I will just, it's kind of a simple thing, but
You're going to read a poem, aren't you?
it was haiku. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Brooks and I do project photography, and there are a lot of things that a lot of our stuff, we're not into the single image. We talked about doing big image, do projects. The projects are a spectrum, okay? I have projects that I have completed completely in 45 minutes. I've had one project which it happened with an iPhone, a cup of tea, a pencil, and a pad of paper. I've had some that I've taken a morning and just done it in a couple hours, some in a half hour. One I've got going for 33 years. Ooh, wait a minute, that's a long one. Don't forget about that one. But a 1 week, a 2 week, an afternoon, 2 days, something like that. It makes no difference what the time is. You don't need an NEA grant. You don't need a second mortgage on your house. You don't need to win the lottery. You can do it yourself, and it can take 5, 10 minutes, 45 minutes, start like that, and, just get it done. I mean, and that's what happens. Sometimes 2 projects that I want to talk about, they're very strange project. One was about 3 or 4 years ago. My oldest daughter came to me and said, "Daddy, you are the best door photographer in the world." I'm not going to crush her, no. But I started looking back and saying, and I went back and looking through my pictures. I'm going, and I'm just pulling out, marking pictures of doors in my Lightroom database. I quit after 170. Okay, so I had a project there I didn't even know I had. I've got another one I just discovered here in the last month or so, chairs. I have got chair photographs out the wazoo. I had no idea that I had them like that, but wow, it worked out. So, that's another project that you didn't know you had, this stealth project. Go back and look for your Lightroom data. I know Brooks does it all the time because he keywords, the fool he is. But he can find projects just by looking up keywords, and you'll have 60, 70 photographs. So I mean, it doesn't need to be a big thing, doesn't need to be informal. If you get lens work, and you should, okay. I've got 6 images this month in a new feature that Brooks is putting together. And the photographs took place, I made all the photographs in 15, 20 minutes. So, that's what you need to do. Just, it doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to get done. And
Is that a challenge? You're telling them that if they can do one in 9 minutes, they'll be better?
No doubt in my mind.
I can do a project in 6 minutes.
You can do that. I mean, put yourself on the clock. No.
There you go.
Go better than that.
I can name that project in 3 notes.
Yeah,
there you go. You've got it. That's it. So, that's it. Vegetables, shells been done, vegetables, peppers, they've been done, bananas, whatever,
I have a Lightroom gallery of fire hydrants.
There you go.
So,
Oh, there's a new
what are you
book.
saying?
There's a new book that everybody ought to know about. It's called The Death of the Artist. It was released during this period of lockdown from a man who lives in Portland, actually. And how creators are struggling to survive in the age of billionaires and big tech. The author's name is William Dershowitz, Desiewicz. And the book is called The Death of the Artist. And it's about the fact that artists are small businessmen, businesswomen, business people. And that if you remove that image from yourself, that you have, I don't have a business, I just do it for pretty. Well, you're not going to be in the ball game. And Brooks is a live example of that. He's not just doing for pretty. He's in the commercial ball game without compromising his values.
No.
And so is Jeff Morefoot with Beta. He's not compromising his values, but and Ray Bidigan in teaching and Laura in teaching. I don't know Jeff Curto. You're a new name for me. I'm sorry. But he teaches. It appears he teaches as well. In any event, no, it's not coming through. Death of the Artist by William Dershowitz.
You can go back to the Renaissance with the sculptors and painters and how they had to hustle for patrons in that case.
But they had patrons. Often it was the church.
How did they get those patrons though? When they started out? I mean,
often
the dynamics were different. It wasn't capitalism per se as we have it currently in the Western world, but this has always been true of the artist.
Yeah,
that's right.
Hey Jeff, is your podcast on the history of photography still live? Because if it is, I want to give a plug for that. It's marvelous work you've done.
Well, thank you, Brooks. Yes, even though I stopped teaching that class 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there's a full semester of a history of photography class online at photohistory.jeffcurto.com.
Yeah.
And I started podcasting the class because I had a half a dozen students who couldn't make a class session, and so I started recording the classes. And then I decided, I'll put it on podcast. And I figured there'd be like 3 or 4 people who would be interested, and it's tailed off a little bit. But when I was doing it actively, I was stunned to learn that there were 12 to 20,000 people a week listening to History of Photography.
Yeah.
That's where the photographer who doesn't know who Edward Weston is can go to find a little dose of Edward Weston. So there's a whole section about that Ansel Adams stuff about how did he get to be famous, because he wanted to be. So thanks, Brooks.
You bet. No, it's fabulous. I've listened to all of them. I learned so much. Thanks.
Yeah, that's it is a wonderful podcast. And yes, I've listened to all of them as well. And it's an education that doesn't even cost you anything more than your time. It's wonderful. Hey.
Well, have we wrapped it up?
If my mic is still working, look at that. I light up. I got to look both ways. And speaking of Ansel Adams, if you can see the other wall, the everyday wall, there's another, there's an Ansel hanging on my wall back there. I think I got it for $2.99 or something. $2.99. But
hey, Walt, can I tell my story about that picture?
Okay.
I picked up Joe Lipka once at Jackson Hole. And we got in the car and headed out for a week of photography, and we got about 30 minutes north of the Jackson Hole airport, and Joe said, oh, sorry, before I left the airport, I should have gone to the bathroom. I didn't. Can you pull over to the rest area? I pulled over to the rest area that's just north of Jackson Hole. And while Joe went in to relieve himself, I walked over and saw that scene that's behind Walt right there of the Snake River. And so for the rest of the week, we were debating, did they put the potty there because that's where Ansel made the photograph, or did Ansel just have to take a pee?
That's great.
And I think that photograph I'm going to use that photo. My clone of that one, I think, is either going to be in my weekly blog either this week or next week, because I put it up there for something like that. So.
Oh man.
Everybody, thank you so much. Congratulations on all these years with PPF. It really warms my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Really enjoy. Give honest feedback.
See ya.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You can
Bye.
stick around if you want to see the reel too, if you want to do that.
Well, it's past my bedtime.
I know.
I'm going to claim being an old man.
East Coast time here.
Yeah, okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Good
Joe.
night, Joe.
Good night, Joe.
I'll stick around to Walt. I want to see the work.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll make that kind of the finale. I mean, it's kind of like, it's the opposite of having Kanye West open for U2. You guys were U2. Kanye West comes after the opening, the big act. So
Okay.
you're the headliner, and unfortunately Kanye is going to come up at the end here, but two announcements, and then I'll go right to the reel, and then I'll say goodnight. And I hope you all stick around for this for just a couple more minutes. I got a call from Oregon Society of Artists today, and they are still down on their entries for their exhibit that they have. They are not accepting any more juried entrants, but they are trying to fill out the rest of the gallery with other pieces. And if you want, you still have to pay a fee, the entrance fee, to show your work, which can be sold there too if you so wish. They have plenty of wall space left. They are willing to take work as late as October 6th, but you have to get online and register with OSA and pay the fee. The trick here, and this is an opportunity for people who want that exposure, Oregon Art Beat, which is the show on OPB weekly, is going to feature OSA's gallery show and they'll be actually taping the photographers that can physically be there. And they've got the social distancing practices in place for separation. They will be, they're also, so the gallery will be open, but to a fewer number of people. The parking lot will have a tent up, and there'll be a reception out there. And both inside and outside, you'll have OPB with their cameras doing, on the spot interviews and this kind of thing. Plus, we will be showing our images from the book that is coming out here next month under the tent on a big screen monitor. So I just wanted to bring that up. And things have changed over the years, but OSA still is definitely wanting us to be involved. And it's one of the few gallery shows this year with all the quarantining issues that's really open.
Hey, Walt?
Yeah.
Did OSA get its broken website fixed yet?
I asked them about that, Phil, and they said, Nancy, the director, said that she did get the certificate. It was I think a problem with their security certificate, but
okay.
Today that it's been taken care of. And if there's an issue and you still can't do it, then just call the office at OSA, and Emily or one of the other folks there will take your information over the phone, as I know, Phil, you had to do. So
yeah.
So that was the big thing. That I wanted to let you know too that Laura Kurtenbach is going to be our guest speaker next month, and should be very interesting, a lot of fun. Be sure you bring up Playboy magazine, Laura, when you talk to us. And we'll show some of the images from the book next month at our meeting. I think you're going to like the book a lot, and hopefully it'll be a reasonable substitute for the lack of having galleries to show work this year. So, and I got to give a shout out to the team, Carol Isaac, Yanis Miglovs, and especially Pat Welly, because Pat, putting together a book, the mechanics of it, Carol and Giannis had the aesthetic and the knowledge of sequencing the images and getting the bleeds right and all those other little nuances. And Pat did all the work on the computer, and it really looks lovely. I could show you the cover of my copy if I could find it here. We've got the proof copy, and it's really great, and it'll be priced reasonably. I'm sure that even if you chose not to be in the book, that you'll probably want a copy or two or three. And we're not making money at it. We're just doing it because that's our mission. So, any questions before I go to the reel? This is really weird having two computers. I get to look at double the people all at once. Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know what the deal. So my primary computer, brand new computer actually, and that's probably the problem. Soundboard issue. So, okay. Well, watch for the newsletter. This week's special irregular newsletter will be coming out with pictures and fun stuff, and another monthly photo challenge, and anything else I can dream up to share with you. Thanks, Brooks. You can identify with that pain, I'm sure, finding content. So, yeah, and I'm asking for content from you people. Come on now. You can send me your profile, your personal profile if you want. Tell us about yourself, or send some pictures or fun stuff like that. So anyway, enough chastising all of you, and I'm going to go to the reel here. It's about a 7-8 minute reel, and there's some great stuff. The theme was well, you'll see. You'll enjoy this, and if I do things right, it'll actually work. Oh, look at that. Oh, hopefully you can hear that. Can't hear it?
Nope.
Okay, stop it there, Walt. Okay, well, hang on just one second. I got it. Now let's see. Okay, there is no music today.
Okay.
Enjoy the pictures.
All right. Oh, never mind. Never mind. No, never mind.
Figured it out.
Never mind.
Excellent.
Yay! Hey, I'm sorry about the audio. Whoops. Walt's got to mute a microphone or something. Gosh. So that's no fun. I hope you enjoyed that. And sorry about the audio issues tonight. I'll have this up on YouTube on our YouTube channel in maybe tomorrow, probably by tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to process to get it up there. And you'll hear the music which goes with it. So that's always fun to not have the music. Anything else for the good of the cause, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah, I've got kind of an announcement that maybe you have seen or haven't seen. It's not a very nice one, but for those of us who loved Opal Creek, the only thing left up there is cabin 4.
Oh,
The rest of it was lost in the fire.
Oh, jeez.
And I put a picture out on Facebook today for it.
Well, that's
Plus,
Jawbone Flats, but
George, plus
how about-
Georgia Tia, who is kind of the backbone behind it, lost his life in the fire also.
Oh, no.
And does that mean the whole forest is gone as well?
That's what I was going to ask.
No, well, from the picture, go on my Facebook page and you'll see it, but the forest is, I mean, it's burnt, but there's still lots of trees around and stuff, but the structures are pretty much gone. And I haven't been up there, I mean, because you can't go up there right now. As soon as I can, I'm going to go up there and see, because there was a lot of buildings in the picture they showed was just where the cabins were.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about some of the other stuff.
So that was Jawbone Flats, right?
Yeah.
Jawbone Flats, yeah.
Is that confirmed about Georgia?
One of our favorite places to go.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Steve, is that confirmed about Georgia Tia?
Pretty much.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
I heard that Silver Falls, though, was spared.
That's also correct.
Yeah.
It looked like it came right up to the eastern border of Silver Falls. Did it encroach at all into the park?
From what I've read, it has not, the park is okay.
Be grateful.
But Opal Creek was one of our favorite places to go for hikes, so.
Oh, yeah.
I've been going up there for, 30, 40 years. I love that place.
And the outings that Brooks mentioned too, is that's the outings and workshops kind of environment that I know.
Yeah.
A lot of people here, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hate to put this on kind of a bummer notice, but I bet PPF would like to know about that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brooks.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you, Brooks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. So much fun to see you guys. Bye, Doug from Marysville, Washington. Wave, Doug. Down there. There you go. There's Doug. My old buddy, Doug, the photographer from Marysville. Actually from Tiger, now from Marysville. If I didn't get to say hi to everybody when you were coming on, I'll say good night to you. Jeff, thanks I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Jeff Morefoot and the Foster's 24 ouncer that you had to take to put up with me. Yeah. And Mr. Curto, if you're still with us, it was good to see you and kind of meet you in person. So I will, without any further, unless you wave your arms, it's a 3, 2, 1. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Brooks.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.